If you have ever been judged by the way you look, before anyone bothered to ask who you really are, stay until the very end of this video. Because what happens to this single father in the school parking lot will remind you why you should never underestimate a quiet man in a worn-out jacket. Before we start, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell, because stories like this one are exactly what this channel was built for, and you will not want to miss what comes next. Daniel Reyes had exactly 4 minutes to get from the warehouse loading dock to Lincoln Elementary before the doors closed for afternoon pickup, and he made it in 3, sprinting the last block in his steel-toed boots, with sawdust still clinging to his flannel sleeves. He was always the last parent in line, always the one apologizing to the teacher on duty, always the one whose daughter waited by the fence with her backpack already on, scanning the crowd until she found his face. Mia was 7 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, and she did not care that her father smelled like machine oil. She only cared that he showed up, every single day, without fail. 2 years earlier, Daniel's wife Elena had died in a car accident on a rain-slicked highway outside of Denver, and the life he had built with her collapsed into something unrecognizable almost overnight. He had once run a small but respected logistics consulting firm with Elena as his business partner and best friend, the two of them building routes and contracts for regional shipping companies out of a converted garage. After she was gone, Daniel could not bring himself to sit in that office alone. He sold what he could, quietly wound down the client contracts, and took a job on the floor of a distribution warehouse because it let him clock out at 4 and be at the school gate by 4:15. Nobody at Lincoln Elementary knew that the tired man in the flannel shirt had once closed 7-figure shipping deals. To them, he was just Mia's dad, the one who was always a little late and always a little rumpled. The trouble started on a Tuesday in October, at the fall carnival planning meeting held in the school gymnasium. Daniel had promised Mia he would come, even though it meant leaving the warehouse an hour early, and losing pay he could not really afford to lose. He arrived straight from his shift, still in his work boots, a streak of grease on his forearm that he had not had time to scrub off. The gymnasium was full of parents in blazers and cashmere sweaters, holding lattes from the coffee cart someone had arranged outside, discussing silent auction, baskets, and vendor booths like they were planning a corporate gala rather than a school fundraiser for a 4th-grade playground. At the front of the room stood Victoria Ashford, the head of the parent committee, a woman who wore her wealth the way other people wore perfume, unmistakable and impossible to ignore. Her husband, Preston Ashford, ran a mid-sized freight and logistics company called Ashford Transit Group, and Victoria made sure everyone in the district knew it. She organized the carnival every year, not out of love for the school, but because it gave her a stage, a chance to remind the other parents exactly where she stood in the town's unspoken hierarchy. When Daniel slipped quietly into a folding chair near the back, she noticed him immediately, the way a hawk notices movement in tall grass. "Excuse me," Victoria said, her voice cutting cleanly across the room, loud enough that the side conversations died down. "Is this meeting for parents on the planning committee? Because I don't believe I've seen you at any of our previous sessions, and this room is really meant for people who have committed to volunteering, not just anyone who wanders in off the street." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter passed through a few of the other parents, the kind of laughter people give when they are relieved the target is not them. Daniel felt his face go warm, but he kept his voice level. "My name is Daniel Reyes. My daughter Mia is in Miss D. Patterson's class. I said I'd help with the carnival if I could, and I came straight from work, and so I apologize if I don't look the part." He gestured faintly at his boots and his grease-streaked sleeve, not as an excuse, but simply as an explanation. Victoria's mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. "Well, we do have a bit of a dress code for these things, unofficially of course, but this is a fundraiser for the school, and we're trying to attract sponsors who take the event seriously. I just worry that if certain volunteers show up looking like they walked off a construction site, It sends the wrong message to the businesses we're courting. She turned back to her clipboard, as though the matter were already settled, as though Daniel had been dismissed like an interruption, rather than acknowledged like a person. Daniel could have argued. He could have told her exactly what his hands had built before grief rearranged his life, exactly how many shipping contracts he had once negotiated, in rooms far more important than a school gymnasium. Instead, he simply stood, nodded once, and said, "I understand. I'll let you get back to your planning." He walked out into the parking lot, found Mia waiting by the fence with her backpack on, and lifted her onto his shoulders the way he always did, letting her tell him about her day while the humiliation settled quietly into his chest, like a stone dropped into still water. On the drive home, Mia chattered about a spelling test and a caterpillar the class had been watching in a jar, and Daniel answered her in all the right places, laughing when she wanted him to laugh, gasping when she told him the caterpillar had finally started spinning its cocoon. It was a skill he had built out of necessity since Elena died, the ability to fold his own pain into a small, quiet compartment and keep it from leaking into the moments that belonged to his daughter. Mia deserved a childhood that felt safe and steady, even on the days when her father's chest felt anything but. He had promised himself, at Elena's funeral, that grief would never become an excuse to shrink from the world in front of his daughter, and he intended to keep that promise, even when people like Victoria made it harder than it needed to be. That night, after Mia was asleep, Daniel did something he rarely allowed himself to do anymore. He opened an old bag in his closet that he had not touched in months and pulled out a folder of photographs from the early years of the business he and Elena had built together. There was a picture of the two of them standing in front of the converted garage on the day they signed their first client, grinning like they had just won something enormous, because in a way, they had. There was another from a conference, Elena mid-laugh at something off-camera, her hand resting on a stack of proposal binders. Daniel sat at the kitchen table for a long time, looking at those photographs, remembering who he's been before. Loss narrowed his world down to warehouse shifts and school pickups. And something in him, some old ember he had thought was fully cold, stirred quietly back to life. Daniel's co-worker at the warehouse, a broad-shouldered man named Marcus who had worked the loading dock for 11 years, noticed something different about Daniel over the following days. Marcus had always liked Daniel, respected the quiet, methodical way he worked, the way he never complained, even when the overnight shifts ran long. "You've got that look," Marcus said one afternoon, as they wheeled pallets toward the truck bay, like a man deciding something. Daniel just shrugged and kept working, not ready yet to explain that a woman in a school gymnasium had accidentally reminded him of a version of himself he had buried alongside his wife, and that he was quietly, carefully, deciding whether it was time to dig that version back up. He did not tell Mia what happened inside. He never let his daughter carry weight that belonged to him. But that night, after she fell asleep clutching the stuffed rabbit her mother had given her, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in front of him, staring at nothing in particular, thinking about how quickly people decided who you were based on what you were wearing when they met you. What Victoria Ashford did not know, what nobody at Lincoln Elementary knew, was that Ashford Transit Group, her husband's company, was 3 weeks away from defaulting on a critical debt refinancing that would determine whether the company survived the year. Preston Ashford had expanded too aggressively during a period of cheap credit, acquiring smaller regional carriers and stretching the company's balance sheet thin. And now, with interest rates climbing and 2 of his largest shipping contracts falling through, Ashford Transit was hemorrhaging cash. Preston had spent the last month quietly meeting with private equity firms and investment groups, searching for a lifeline before the banks called in the loans, and the whole operation collapsed, taking 400 jobs down with it. The investment group Preston had finally secured a meeting with was a small, selective firm called Meridian Capital Partners, known in shipping and logistics circles for being difficult to reach and even harder to impress. Meridian did not advertise. did not take cold pitches, and was rumored to be run by a reclusive founder who had made his early fortune building and selling logistics software before the industry even knew it needed such tools. Preston had been trying to get a meeting with Meridian for 6 weeks through 3 different intermediaries, and when the email finally arrived confirming a sit-down, he felt something close to relief for the first time in a month. What Preston did not know, what none of his advisors had bothered to mention because they themselves did not fully understand it, was that Meridian Capital Partners had been founded and was still quietly controlled by Daniel Reyes, under the name he had used for the firm long before Elena died, back when they built it together in that converted garage. After Elena's death, Daniel had transferred day-to-day operations to a trusted managing partner named Grace Okonkwo, stepped back from public involvement entirely, and let the firm run on the systems the two of them had built. He still reviewed every major investment personally, still approved every deal above a certain threshold, but he did it from a laptop at his kitchen table after Mia went to bed. Never in a boardroom, never in front of a camera, never in a way that connected the name Daniel Reyes to anything larger than a warehouse worker who picked his daughter up at 4:15. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday morning at Meridian's offices downtown, and Grace had sent Daniel the file on Ashford Transit Group 3 days earlier, flagging it as a strong opportunity if the debt structure could be renegotiated and operational costs trimmed. Daniel read through the financials that night after Mia was asleep, recognizing the company name immediately, feeling a strange, cold clarity settle over him as he connected Ashford Transit Group to Preston Ashford, and Preston Ashford to Victoria, and Victoria to the woman who had told him, in front of a room full of parents, that he looked like he had walked off a construction site. He almost told Grace to hand the meeting to someone else. Some petty, wounded part of him wanted nothing to do with the Ashford family, wanted to let Victoria's husband twist in the wind, the way she had let him twist in that gymnasium. But Daniel thought about the 400 employees at Ashford Transit who had never insulted anyone, who had families depending on those paychecks the same way he depended on his warehouse wages, before Meridian gave him the freedom to choose differently. He thought about what Elena would have said, how she always believed that people deserved to be judged by their actions in the moment that mattered most, not by the worst thing anyone else had done to you. So Daniel told Grace he would take the meeting himself, in person, for the first time in over 2 years. Thursday morning, Preston Ashford arrived at Meridian Capital's downtown offices in his best suit, rehearsing his pitch in the elevator, sweat gathering at his collar, despite the building's cool air conditioning. He was led into a modest conference room, expecting to meet a team of sharp-suited analysts or perhaps a junior partner, sent to do the preliminary vetting before the real decision-maker would ever be bothered to appear. Instead, the door opened, and a man in a simple charcoal sweater walked in alone, carrying a single folder, and extended his hand. "Mr. Ashford, thank you for coming in. I'm Daniel Reyes, managing principal here at Meridian." Preston shook his hand, confused for a moment by the plainness of the man in front of him, by the absence of any entourage, before professional instinct took over, and he launched into the presentation he had rehearsed a dozen times in the mirror. Daniel listened patiently, asked sharp, precise questions about route density and fuel contracts and driver retention, questions that made it clear within minutes that he understood the freight business at a level far beyond a typical investor. Preston found himself relaxing slightly, encouraged that this quiet man seemed to genuinely grasp the mechanics of the company he had spent 15 years building. Near the end of the meeting, as Preston gathered his papers, he mentioned almost offhandedly that his wife ran the parent committee at their daughter's elementary school, making conversation, trying to find common ground with a man whose read on him he could not quite place. "Lincoln Elementary, by any chance?" Daniel asked, his tone even. Preston blinked. "Yes, actually. Do you have kids there?" "My daughter Mia is in the 2nd grade. Daniel closed the folder in front of him and looked up. I was at the carnival planning meeting a few weeks ago. Your wife runs it. Something in Daniel's tone made Preston go still. He remembered, vaguely, Victoria mentioning a man who had shown up in work boots, how she had laughed about it at dinner, called him inappropriate for the room. Preston had not thought much of it at the time, the kind of story that passes through a household without leaving a mark. Now, sitting across from the man holding his company's future in his hands, he felt the floor tilt slightly beneath him. Daniel did not raise his voice. He did not need to. I want to be clear about something before we go any further, Mr. Ashford. This deal will be evaluated on the merits of your business, nothing else. I don't hold grudges against people for things they didn't do themselves. But I think it's worth telling you that 3 weeks ago, your wife told me, in a room full of other parents, that I looked like I'd walked off a construction site and didn't belong there. I was still in my work clothes because I came straight from my warehouse shift to keep a promise to my daughter. I want you to understand that the man standing in front of your family that day and the man sitting across from you today, making a decision about 400 of your employees' jobs, are the same person. Preston sat in stunned silence for a long moment, the weight of it settling over him. He thought about his employees, about the drivers with mortgages and the dispatchers with kids in college, about how close the company had come to collapse, and about his wife's easy cruelty toward a stranger she had decided, in an instant, was beneath her notice. Mr. Reyes, I don't know what to say. I had no idea. I'm deeply sorry for how she spoke to you, and I promise you that has nothing to do with who I am as a businessman or as a person. I believe you, Daniel said, and he meant it. That's exactly why we're still in this room. If I judged people the way I was judged that day, we wouldn't be having this conversation, and 400 families would be dealing with a much harder Christmas this year. I'd rather be better than that. Meridian Capital approved a restructuring investment in Ashford Transit Group 2 weeks later, injecting the capital needed to refinance the debt, extending payment terms, and installing a leaner operational structure that Daniel personally helped design, drawing on the exact kind of logistics expertise Elena and he had built their original firm on. The jobs were saved, the company stabilized, and Preston Ashford, humbled and grateful, asked Daniel if he would be willing to come to dinner, so that Victoria could apologize properly, in person, for what she had said. Daniel almost declined. Some part of him wanted to let the story end with the deal, wanted to walk away having done the slow-to-right thing, without needing anything from the Ashfords in return. But he thought about Mia, about the example he wanted to set for her, about how forgiveness, offered freely, was worth more than forgiveness extracted through leverage, and he agreed to come, on the condition that it would not be a business dinner, but simply 2 families sharing a meal. Victoria opened the door that Friday evening, expecting, according to Preston, an important business associate of her husband's, someone she had been instructed to treat with particular warmth, given how much the company owed him. When she saw Daniel Reyes standing on her porch, holding Mia's hand, her polished composure cracked visibly for just a moment before she recovered it. Mr. Reyes, she said carefully, Preston mentioned you'd be joining us. I didn't realize you 2 already knew each other. We met at the school, Daniel said simply, watching recognition and horror move across her face in real time as the pieces clicked into place. Dinner was quiet at first, stilted with the particular awkwardness of a truth everyone in this room already understood, but no one had yet spoken aloud. It was Victoria, finally, midway through the meal, who set down her fork and looked directly at Daniel. I owe you an apology, and I've been trying to find the words for it since Preston told me who you were 3 days ago. I judged you based on how you looked, in front of a room full of people, and I embarrassed you when all you were trying to do was be a good father to your daughter. There's no excuse for that. I was cruel, and I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Not because of what you did for Preston's company, but because it was simply the wrong way to treat another human being. Daniel considered her for a moment before answering. I appreciate you saying that, and I mean that sincerely. But I want you to understand something. I didn't approve this investment to teach you a lesson. And I'm not here tonight because I need your apology to feel whole. I've had 2 years to learn that the opinions of people who judge you before they know you say a lot. More about them than they say about you. I came tonight because my daughter is watching how I handle moments like this. And I want her to grow up believing that grace is stronger than pride, even when pride would feel a lot more satisfying in the moment. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She visibly fought to control. And for the first time since Daniel had met her, the performance fell away entirely, leaving just a woman confronting the gap between the person she had been raised to project and the person she actually wanted to be. I'd like to do better, she said quietly. Not just for Preston's business, for myself. The following spring, at the very carnival Victoria had once run like a corporate showcase, something quietly remarkable happened. Victoria had asked Daniel weeks earlier, almost shyly, if he would be willing to help organize the event that year. Not as a favor to her, but because, in her words, you probably understand what actually matters to families a lot better than I ever did. Daniel agreed, on one condition: no dress code, spoken or unspoken, and no ranking of parents by what they could afford to contribute. Victoria did not argue. On the day of the carnival, Daniel arrived straight from a half-day shift at the warehouse, still in his work boots, carrying 2 folding tables in the bed of his truck, because the rental company had come up short. Marcus came with him, along with 3 other co-workers from the loading dock, who Daniel had invited weeks earlier. And together, they built the ring toss booth and the dunk tank, without anyone once suggesting they looked out of place. Victoria met Daniel at the gate, took one look at his boots, and laughed. A genuine, easy laugh that had nothing performative left in it. Some habits are worth keeping, she said, and handed him a clipboard instead of a judgment. Mia ran the whole afternoon with Charlotte Ashford at her side, the 2 of them collecting tickets for the cakewalk, both of them sticky with cotton candy by 3 o'clock. At one point, Daniel looked up from the dunk tank, where he had just spent 10 straight minutes getting soaked at the hands of a line of gleeful second graders, and saw Preston watching him with an expression that looked almost like envy. "You know," Preston said, when Daniel finally climbed out, dripping and laughing, "I run a 400-person company, and I don't think I've ever had this much fun on a Saturday." Daniel toweled off his hair and shrugged. "That's the part nobody tells you about success. It doesn't automatically come with more Saturdays like this one. You have to choose them." Grace Okonkwo flew in from the coast that weekend, ostensibly to review a few files with Daniel, but really, as she admitted over funnel cake near the end of the day, because she wanted to see for herself the small, ordinary life Daniel had built around the extraordinary one he kept mostly hidden. "You could run this firm from a corner office with your name on the door," Grace told him quietly, watching Mia race Charlotte toward the face-painting booth. "You know that. Half our investors would love to finally put a face to Meridian." Daniel shook his head, watching his daughter's braids bounce as she ran. "I already have the corner office that matters," he said. "It's a folding chair by that fence, $4.15 every afternoon. Everything else is just how I pay for it." By the time the carnival wound down, and the last string lights flickered on over the parking lot, Victoria found Daniel loading folding tables back into his truck bed and stood beside him for a bus, simply watching Mia and Charlotte chase each other in circles under the fading October light. "I used to think an event like this was about proving something," she finally said. "Now I think I just wanted my daughter to see people having a good time, and somehow that only started actually happening once I stopped worrying about who belonged in the room." Daniel closed the tailgate and looked at her. No trace of old resentment left in his expression, only something closer to quiet respect for a person willing to change. "That's the whole secret," he said. "Most people just never get the chance to be told, plainly, that they got it wrong. You did. That took more than most people manage." In the months that followed, something genuinely shifted. Victoria stepped back from running the carnival like a networking event and started actually asking other parents, including the ones in work boots and warehouse uniforms, what they needed help with, rather than what they could contribute to the optics of the event. Mia and the Ashfords' daughter, Charlotte, became inseparable friends, running through each other's backyards, and Daniel found himself, cautiously, building something like a friendship with Preston, two men who understood the particular loneliness of carrying a company or a household on their shoulders. Daniel never told anyone at the school who he really was, beyond what the Ashfords already knew, and he never asked them to keep it secret, so much as they simply understood, without being told, that he preferred it that way. He still showed up to pick up in his work clothes most days, still smelled faintly of the warehouse, still sprinted the last block when his shift ran long. Being the quiet founder of Meridian Capital Partners was not who Daniel Reyes was. It was simply something he did. Who he was, the thing that mattered most, was the man Mia found waiting by the fence every single afternoon, the one who lifted her onto his shoulders and listened to every detail of her day, like it was the most important news in the world. Years later, when Mia was old enough to understand the whole story, Daniel told her about the gymnasium, about Victoria's words, about the meeting with Preston, about the choice he made not to let one woman's cruelty decide how he treated her husband's mice and employees. He told her that the easiest thing in the world is to let someone else's judgment of you become the story you tell about yourself, and the hardest and most important thing is to remember who you actually are, underneath whatever anyone else decides to see. Mia asked him if he was ever tempted to let Ashford Transit fail, just to prove Victoria wrong about who mattered and who didn't. Daniel thought about it for a long moment before he answered. For about 5 minutes, he admitted. And then I remembered that being right and being good aren't always the same thing, and I'd rather raise you to value the second one. Mia never forgot that conversation, and years later, when she built her own career and faced her own moments of being underestimated by people who judged her too quickly, she thought of her father in his work boots, quietly deciding that 400 strangers' livelihoods mattered more than his own wounded pride, and she understood, finally, the particular kind of strength that never needs to announce itself to be real. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone in your own life who showed up quietly and never asked for credit, share it with them, and let us know in the comments what part stayed with you the most. Stories like Daniel's are why this channel exists, so make sure you're subscribed and that notification bell is on, because there is another story just like this one waiting for you very soon.